One of the biggest contradictions in podcasting is the fact that being an amateur might actually be the biggest advantage you have.
I definitely feel like, what have I got to offer?
Today, we're coaching Allan. He's a brand new podcaster who's suffering from the same fears that stop thousands of new podcasters from ever hitting record.
Don't do as I say, kind of thing. I have about 4 listeners, and one of them being the wife,
Over this episode, you'll discover how to turn imposter syndrome into your secret weapon, how to build an audience from zero, and how to create content that never runs dry.
This kind of angle that you're coming from can be a strength.
Sharing those stories are actually so powerful. They make such great content. Watch Allan going from questioning his worth to getting a complete roadmap for podcast growth, including that is the collaboration strategy that could change everything for him.
I found it very listenable. It certainly doesn't sound to me like a 13th episode. They, by nature, will share it with their own audience.
Whether you're just starting out with your podcast or you're an industry veteran, I hope this episode has a bunch of strategies and tactics that you can put into play right away to help grow your own show. Let's jump in. So what do you want to dig into first?
Ooh, it was a whole slate of areas, wasn't it, really? I think pretty much name an area and I've got an issue with it. I've been fascinated by podcasts for years. I started listening to them when I got my first iPhone. And I've always kind of wanted to do one, but I'm the kind of person I'd kind of come up with an idea and then, just leave it or worry at it until it suddenly didn't seem like a good idea and so on. And finally, I thought of this idea, my current podcast, and I just kind of dived in. So I didn't do a lot of planning. Basically, I am a small investor. I do some investing. So I thought, you know what? I have to read books and read articles and keep up to date anyway. I might as well just do a podcast about that and see how it goes. But, I'm not a professional. So I do have a sense of kind of imposter syndrome where, I don't, there's loads of investors out there. It's a very kind of one of these fields where lots of people know a lot of stuff. And I definitely feel like, what have I got to offer? And I suppose a lot of people feel the same. But yeah, any tips you have on that?
Yeah, it's one of the most common questions, isn't it? Is this the most common thing we're asked, Matthew? Really confidence or imposter syndrome type things?
It certainly is up there. Yeah, certainly is up there as one of the big struggles that a lot of podcasters face. I think almost everyone, like yourself, Colin, I bet you've had that in the past as well.
Okay, yeah, everyone does. I mean, it's like, it doesn't matter how long you're doing this either, Allan. That's maybe, I'm not sure if this is I often say this to people who bring it up. Not sure if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I don't think it ever goes away is the trouble. I think it's always just kind of making your way through your creator life and kind of gaining confidence in different ways. But there's always like a new thing that, well, if you're pushing yourself, there's always a new thing you want to try that will kind of bring that little bit of imposter syndrome back. But yeah, certainly there's lots of stuff we can do. So lots of tips we have around trying to tackle this. So do you want to jump into one first, Matthew? You had a couple of things noted down here. What's your kind of approach to this?
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's a bit of reframing in here that, you refer to yourself, Allan, as an amateur, and you point out that there's a lot of people out there who know a lot more than you, who maybe have better credentials, are more well-known, etc., etc. But this kind of angle that you're coming from can be a strength because it makes you very relatable. I kind of think back to 10, 12 years ago, I was really into writing podcasts. I was writing a lot at the time, writing a lot of fiction. And I listened to a few podcasts and it was just literally people either at my own level or just maybe a year or two ahead of me. So I wasn't listening to Stephen King or whatever. I was listening to, they were still amateurs, a lot of them. And I liked that because I was always thinking, what they're doing is very similar to me. Their struggles, their problems, the things they're noticing, they're the same as me. Or they're just like a little bit ahead, and it made it seem very achievable to get to that level. It wasn't like, here's how I won the Pulitzer because I was miles off that. And, well, frankly, still am. But you know what I mean? Like, does that kind of make sense, Allan?
Yes, I think it does. Yeah, I mean, it's one of these fields where if you're an expert, it can very easily turn into a lecture, can't it? And I'm just not qualified to give lectures. So I suppose I need to make it more personal.
Yeah, I think it's so much about experience, isn't it? Like I'm the same as well. I listen to loads of podcasts where it's somebody that is going through the same experience as me, and it's what they're learning at the time. I mean, that's the kind of question I often say to ask. Like if you're struggling with something around imposter syndrome, it's think about what really is expertise, what makes somebody an expert. I mean, often it's actually just, you don't need to be an expert to actually teach. It's a bit of expertise really just comes through experience. It's just having learned something, whether it's, reading, whether it's gaining from other people's experience, or whether it's actually something that you've learned yourself through doing. And actually the most entertaining content tends to be, in my opinion, reading a story of somebody actually going through something and experiencing it. So like you telling a story of an investment you made or an approach you took or a technique you tried out, and just what happened actually is often, I find, the most interesting content. And actually, interestingly, you kind of imagine the expert as the person that, knows how to do everything right. But often in podcasting or content creating, the stories around the things you got wrong or the mistakes you made are actually the better, You can learn from them as well, and they tend to be more entertaining. Like, do you consume much content like that yourself, Allan?
Yes. Yes, I think so. Certainly, it's the podcasts I enjoy most are the relatable ones with people I've got used to, who I want to hear from them rather than just the. It's not about the material. It obviously is a little bit, but it's as much about the person or people, having a chat or whatever.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've picked a solo podcast mainly because I didn't have anyone interested in a similar thing who I could do a podcast with.
Yeah.
But I have tried to pick a format. I've ended up with a format where I'm basically picking like a resource, a podcast, and an article that I've found that week, and then I'm trying to talk about them in terms of why they're of interest to me and what the story is, why they're relevant to me, which I suppose is what we're getting at, is it?
Definitely. Sorry, did you have something to add there,
No,
Colin?
go for it, Matthew, go for it.
Yeah, I was going to say, Allan, definitely. I actually did listen to your latest episode on the walk home from the nursery this morning, so that kept me entertained in the rain. But I'm as far from your target audience as it's possible to get, and yet I found it very listenable because just the way you came at it, like you're saying, it was you opened with a personal story, relevant to the topic, but you got straight in. It was. About you in relation to the topic and what you thought and why you pointed to certain resources. At no point did I not understand or lose, track of what you were saying, even though, like I say, I know nothing about this world at all, but you kept it very much, and what's the word I'm looking for? Plain speak's unfair, but I didn't feel lost at any point, and you kept bringing it back to this is what I think, this is why I find this interesting, etc., etc. So I think you handled that really well. And solo episodes are difficult. Not a lot of people could pull them off, but I certainly felt that you did a very good job of that. So nice work.
I find Oh, sorry, Colin.
No, go on, Allan. Go on.
No, I was just going to say I agree with you about the solo. I mean, I don't have a problem chatting usually, and yet I've listened to your advice before because I've listened to both your podcasts for years and thought I really should do that. But you've said with editing, just record it and basically top and tail it and then let it go out. I'm afraid I do a fair bit of editing, and what I edit out are silences of me taking time out to almost think about what I'm going to say next, because being on your own is a little bit difficult in that sense. I think you really, it's easier feeling like you're talking to someone.
Yeah, I get that. I think that's totally fine editing. Like that is actually decent because that's still quite quick. Like you can go through the waveform and you can just see the little gaps. So that's like stuff that you can do pretty simply, and it's giving you, that's helping the content, isn't it? Because it's giving you the time to think, to formulate, to really improve what you're doing. So I wouldn't worry too much about that at all. All I was going to add around the confidence type thing is there's definitely something around, it's your almost the beginner's mindset similar to what Matthew was saying earlier on, the fact that you're telling your own stories, you're making it relatable, and you're not saying like this is the right way to do it. You're saying this is the way I do it. This is the way that makes me interested. And I think that often helps people get over that imposter syndrome, because you're not telling people like this is the expert's way or this is the only way. It's just you're telling them the way you did it.
Yeah.
And sharing those stories are actually so powerful. They make such great content. Just the stories of how you went about something, examples of what you did, those little case studies that you can share about yourself, that really you're not placing yourself on a pedestal. And often, like I said, you'll be talking about mistakes. You're just saying this is our way to do it. And if you're interested in this topic, I have no doubt you'll be interested in the way I've done it as well. You know, that kind of approach, I think.
It is one of these fields that comes with a bit of sort of legal fear as well, because like investing, finance, and so on, they come with so many kind of restrictions. You know, you have to say, I'm definitely not giving financial advice. don't do as I say, kind of thing. And I suppose that's a problem in other fields as well. I'm just very aware of it, very aware that I must keep it general and be very much not kind of so. But maybe that's one of those things newbies like me worry about more than we should. I don't know. Is that right?
I think, again, it's around, probably you're right, with finance and stuff, it's probably a little bit more worrisome in terms of legal stuff. So maybe it is worth actually just grabbing even if you can budget it, like grab an hour with a solicitor or something and see what you need to do to make sure you're covered in that sense. But I think if you're telling your own stories, like it tends to be, as long as you're just sharing your own experience and saying this is something that happened, then you're covered there. You're not telling people what to do. Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
And you have that disclaimer. Again, the irony that I have to caveat with, I am not a lawyer, but you have that disclaimer in at the end that basically says, you know, I'm not giving advice. So in my view, that's good enough. And I never heard you at any point telling me to do something. All I heard was you relating to things personally, talking about what you do. So, I mean, to me, you've nothing to worry about on that front.
Yeah,
so send your lawyer to me, I'll sort it out.
There's actually, I've got a couple of practical things that I've known people to do and help people through with imposter syndrome. There's a couple of little tactics, I think. With things like this, with confidence type building approaches, they can sometimes sound a little bit cheesy or silly almost, but I'll tell you them, and I'll say that I've seen these work really well, and I've tried some of them myself as well. One that I've seen worked actually quite nicely is just to start to create yourself an evidence file, almost. An evidence of confidence. So like just have wherever you keep your notes, whether it's Apple Notes, Evernote, whatever it might be, just whenever something happens that proves that you have the ability to give good advice, you have the ability to help people, you have the ability to share these stories, whether it's a milestone you've hit, you know, in your case, it might be, you know, something that worked really well, a good deal, a tactic that worked. Even if it's positive feedback, you know, of something, somebody sends something in and says, oh, I tried this thing that you tried and it worked for me as well. Anytime you've helped somebody, anytime you've answered a question, episodes you're proud of as well, things like that. It's hard to sometimes like log those things and tell yourself you're doing a good job. Like we tend to only focus on the things we've done wrong. So logging those kind of things can be really helpful sometimes.
Yeah.
Quick aside to talk to you about Alitu. Alitu is our podcast maker app. It's the product we sell, which supports all the free content like this that we put out in the world. It includes call recording, audio cleanup, audio editing, and podcast hosting, all in one simple place. Its primary goal is to make it as easy as possible for you to create your podcast, automating a lot of what you do and helping with the rest. It's just the simplest way to make your podcast and publish it to the world. For example, in Alitu here, you can record by yourself or with a group. It cleans up any audio you upload or record automatically, including noise reduction, leveling, normalization, all that stuff. You can edit super easily, just like this, and you can edit at double speed as well if you choose. And it includes text-based editing, so you can edit just as if you're using a Word document. Music fades are taken care of with just the click of a button, and you can add files to your timeline with just a click as well. And then finally, publish with all your detail in here with the inbuilt hosting, and you can use AI to generate titles and descriptions if you want to. If you want to check it out, go over to alitu.com. That's alitu.com, and you can get a 7-day trial to give it a shot.
I mean, I can't believe I've done 13 episodes. That's yeah, I started out and I daren't listen to the first few again, to be honest. It's like,
That's the same for many of us, don't worry. Yeah.
you know, but I started and said, I'm just going to do this every week
Yeah.
for the next couple of months and see how it goes. And I do think it's improved. I do think I've got a long way to go, but I feel like Matthew's listened to the latest one. I feel like that's much more kind of much improved and much more how it's got a structure now, and you know that kind of feels like it flows. I don't know if I don't know what you think of my structure, Matthew.
No, I liked it. I mean, I like this approach of again, you're building, you're given resources, but it's not just, you're not just saying check this out, check this out, check this out. You know, you've got reasons for it. You've got good hooks and justifications in that personal story. So I really liked the approach. Nice, short, sharp episodes as well. Didn't go on too long. It certainly doesn't sound to me like a 13th episode. It does sound like you've been doing it longer, so well done on that. I mean, just like I had some very brief pointers just whilst we're on the subject listening to your show. So I noted down that, as I've said already, I liked how you got into it with, you related it to a kind of personal story or anecdote. Just one wee thing that jumped out, and we talk about this on the show, was at the very end, you had asked the listener to get in touch with feedback for you. I would just try to ask a more specific question of them, maybe relate that to the episode you've just done. So, you know, I mentioned such and such today. Is that, you know what I mean? Like, just don't ask for feedback, because you won't tend to hear anything. So just try and maybe specify that question a wee bit more. I think you might end up getting a bit more feedback that way. Yeah, and the resources of the week as well, I really liked that. So I think you had, was it a newsletter, a podcast, and
a newsletter, an article, and a podcast this week. The resources of the week thing was, because that was how it started. I was just going to pick something to talk about. So the first episodes, I just picked one thing, but it was just, I ended up just waffling, to be honest. And so what the resource of the week I've thought can be a book, but I can't commit to reading a new finance book every week. So, you know, or a newsletter, or I've also looked at like a finance platform where the platform I use to get share data, so company data from. I've looked at that a couple of weeks back. So that kind of thing. So just something that I use or have read that's a bit more detailed that I think's worth sharing, really. But like with a book, I thought there's no point in me going into all the details in the book, because, you know, it's a book worth. So, you know, but to share why I've read it, why it's useful, what it gives you, seems like it seems like something that someone who's fairly new to investing might want to listen to. That's what I thought.
I mean, we're obviously going to touch on the audience growth stuff, which is something you mentioned. I'm curious, like, when you mention these resources, you know, people's podcasts, people's newsletters, are you reaching out to them to let them know?
I haven't yet. No, I've done nothing regarding audience. To be honest, I've just been it's been as much as I can do to keep myself doing it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I think that's quite common. It's the first 10 to 15 to even 20 episodes are really just try to get into that workflow, that groove. You've probably heard us talk about this before, like try not to take on too much too early. So as soon as you feel though you're in more of a groove, like the recording every single week starts to feel a little bit easier, because you know what you're doing, you've got this framework, then you can start to add in those extras. But I love a framework like this, like a structure like this. There's so much that you can do with it. And we'll come on to, I had a couple of things I wanted to talk about during the growth part of this, actually, that I think your framework, your structure here could really help with. But just a wee kind of educational tidbit here related to what you're talking about there around the, you know, sharing the resource of the week, the article of the week, the podcast of the week. You're absolutely right. You can't cover, you know, the whole book. But a way to make a segment like that really useful is to take out at least one or two takeaways. So make sure that you're covering the book, you're saying why it was useful to you, but share one thing. Like, definitely take one tactic or one tip or one thing that you got from it that people can actually go and use straight away. So you are doing some education around it as well. I think that can be a really nice way to take a big resource and really just give that teaser, one thing that they can use on its own that teases them to go and then consume the whole thing.
Yeah. That's good advice, definitely.
Cool. I wondered as well, like you've got the resource of the week, the article of the week, the podcast of the week. If you were wanting to, like you said, around maybe you can't find a resource every single week, you could almost say, the resource of the week could be an article or a podcast or a book or a whatever. You've got those kind of segments where you've got, your intro, your weekly update, and then you do talk about one or two resources of the week. And one of them might happen to be an article, might happen to be a podcast, but it gives you a bit more flexibility potentially to play around with that format and not feel the pressure to have a book every week or a podcast every week or an article every week.
Yeah, because the article every week is the easiest, definitely.
Right.
Because there's just so much out there and so easy to read and so on. But yeah, once you start moving into the others, it can, get a bit more difficult because you do feel the pressure of if I've said this is what I'm definitely going to have, then I've got to find it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you suddenly start to feel a little bit of a barrier in putting that show together every single week in that case. Do you want to dig into the audience growth stuff or anything else around the structure or anything?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of, I think I have about 4 listeners. One of them being the wife, and the other one being me. It's a friend of mine listens, I think, but I kind of have done nothing about putting it out there beyond. I did set up a Blue Sky account and post every week for just to say episode's now live, but I have no followers. Well, I think a couple of bots maybe. But I'm not really sure where to start as to how to almost promote it a little bit and get people listening.
I mean, you've done the right thing here because you're now at a stage where this is a podcast that's listenable enough to get an audience, more than. So, a lot of people maybe put out episode 1 and shoot their promotion bolt on that, and it's just not there yet. So, you've gone about this the right way. And now a starting point here is just to think about, like, who are you actually speaking to here? Like, if we think about the classic example of an avatar, a target listener, what would Allan of, say, 2 years ago make of this podcast?
He would like it, which, in a sense, that's... a podcast for me.
Yeah, I mean, but that's a perfect approach.
That was part of the reason why this is a really easy idea, in the sense that it's kind of things I should be doing anyway. So it helps me just by doing it, because I invest anyway. So it almost makes it easier to do because it makes me read stuff a little bit more thoroughly and research stuff a little bit more thoroughly. So that's very positive. But yeah, I think it is for, if you've got a professional investor, the only reason they would want to listen to it is because they found it entertaining. They wouldn't learn a lot. Although you never know. I mean, you never know anything. But really it is for someone who is just a little bit interested in doing a bit of investing on the side and, is fairly new to it, I think.
I think that's a really worthwhile way to think about it too. Like you're excluding people. That's often a great way to actually define your audience, to say who's it not for as much as who it is for. So you're not for expert investors. That's totally fine. So you're for amateur investors. You're for people that maybe have 1 year, 2 year experience in this. They're just starting to play around with it. They're just thinking about investing a little bit more of their income into it, that kind of thing. Yeah. So that's a really good way to start to think about it. Yeah, for sure.
Or someone who's done it who's invested for longer, but has kind of been investing in funds and things like that, and is suddenly thinking, should I buy company shares? Because I'm very much about company shares. I like looking at companies, and that's why I do it. So. This is not finance advice at all. It is very much, if you want to buy shares in companies, these things are of interest.
This is how you go about it. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So where do those people hang out? Like where do you hang out? Where did you hang out 2 years ago? Like where do you think you could find these people and start to market to them?
Oh, well, I started by pretty much reading the I've never been big on kind of social media or chat rooms or anything like that, so I'm not really sure. I started by reading sort of magazines like the Investors Chronicle and things like that.
I mean, it could be, what do you think, Matthew? It could be that actually at this stage, so if there's not been much marketing done at all, actually maybe the discoverability side is the best place to start. Is that around like even just titles, artwork, description, episode titles, all that kind of stuff? What do you think, Matthew? Did you have another place to think about?
Well, I was just actually going to hop on over to the site. So it's smallinvestortoolbox.com. So well done on the domain name. And we'll just have a wee look at
totally. You've got your own domain name there, which is a great start. So you've got your own website. So that's discoverability on Google in the first place. So when we're starting to talk about discoverability, we're talking about web search, so Google search, which now ties into AI search as well. So that's kind of how they all tie together. If you have a good website with decent rankings, then that starts to bleed over into AI recommendations as well. But equally, you've got the content platforms too. So whether it's the podcast platforms, podcast directories like Apple Podcasts, like Spotify, and then you've got YouTube as well, potentially, whether you want to go into that route or not. So yeah, there's a few different areas here. But yeah, Matthew, what are you seeing there on the website?
I like your episode titles. There's no filler in here. There's no episode 3 or whatever. You know, an example here, like where was it? Understanding annual reports and where to find them. Like, boom. You don't need any more than that. So you're doing a really good job here. It's just a case now, like you're building that back catalogue, and when someone who is your target listener comes across these episodes, they'll be compelled by them, and it's just about really getting those initial eyeballs. So again, for somebody who isn't really looking to do a lot of social stuff to grow your podcast, I would maybe look, I know it's a solo show, but if you could find a couple of guests, I'm not saying big famous guests, but I'm saying people in your space that already have a decent audience, whether they're podcasters or YouTubers or whatever, and just invite a couple of them on, do interviews, mix up a couple of interview shows, and that can give you a good early core. I've done that with my own podcast in the past. I just got a couple of decent, not even high profile folks, but just decent folks who had enough of an audience, and that just gave me a wee early bump, and it built that early core of listeners. So off the top of your head, can you think of a couple of folks that might be of interest for getting on? You don't have to name them as such, but
I could think of a few people who would be interesting to talk to. Definitely, like some of the people who do the kind of the newsletters. You see, there's lots of people who do like podcasts and newsletters, which are almost like company results and share tips and things like that. Which I was very sure I didn't want to do. So I tried really hard. That's not what I'm doing. I'm doing sort of like the next level down from that. But those kind of people, will have potentially the kind of audiences who might be interested in what I'm doing.
I think one of the great thing to think about here, I mentioned the fact that I think your segment type approach is great. It's a great tool for growth. One thing you could do is actually think more about you could do interviews by all means, but you could also do them more collaboratively in, here's my guest co-host for the week. These can even turn into regular co-hosts who come on and actually share their resource of the week, their article of the week, their podcast of the week as well. So you keep the same format, but you do a little update on both of your approaches these days, like maybe ask them a few questions about what they're up to, what they've been investing in, all those kind of things, but then keep on your same segment type format so that actually it doesn't really change what you're doing. You can still do your solo episodes, but maybe once a month or so you have like a co-host to come in and contribute to the same format, maybe.
I mean, it's a nice idea because definitely it's the kind of thing that people who are interested in it like to chat about it.
Yes, yeah, indeed.
I mean, another thing that we talk about quite a lot. I mean, we talk about our we've got one of our many frameworks or many acronyms, and one of them is RACE. So it's growing your podcast basically without over-reliance or any reliance on things like social media. So it's resonate, assemble, collaborate and enhance. So the enhance part could come later, but the collaboration part I think is a huge part of podcast growth. So, we've talked about some ways that you might be able to do that in terms of getting people on for interviews, but just starting to build out that small bank of contacts who are also creating content in adjacent topics. Maybe you have 5 or 6 people and you use a tool like SpeakPipe or Telby and you just do semi-regular montage episodes. So, you're asking them all for a tip on a certain thing that's on your mind, and they all get back to you with that, and you could put a montage episode together on that. Maybe they do want to become semi-regular contributors where they're just turning up, offering, the latest on their own sort of area of expertise. So collaborating with other people in sort of adjacent topics and audiences is a great way to grow your show, because they, by nature, will share it with their own audience. They'll be interested as well. So I think that's certainly something to consider. What do you think, Colin?
Yeah, and there's so many ways to do it beyond just the standard interview too. Like we mentioned, that kind of more co-hosted approach where people have a bit more ownership over it. They're not just coming along to be interviewed, but they bring some really good content themselves. And often you can arrange that whereby, because they are co-hosting as opposed to just being interviewed, they can create it as content for their own show as well. So actually kind of it provides double duty. It gives them some value because they can repost that episode on their own feed. And that then gives you visibility on their show as well. You can even do things like episode swaps. Like if you have an episode you're particularly proud of, you can get in touch with other podcasters in the same space and say, do you fancy, I'll play an episode of yours on my feed if you play one of mine on yours. Hopefully we can offer a bit more value to both audiences and maybe do a bit of cross-pollination, like get listeners listening to both sides.
Yeah.
And there's a few other ways that you can do a panel discussion, bring on a few people. You can actually kind of join up with a few other people, even like the podcast network type approach or live streaming, that type of stuff. Like there's lots of different ways. We've got a couple of articles actually on this I could send over afterwards with lots of different kind of explanations around different ways to collaborate. I'll pop that in the show notes as well for anyone out there listening. But yeah, there's so many more ways than just interviews.
How technically difficult is doing panel interviews and so on, getting together a panel, running it, like?
I think with a bit of prep, they're actually totally fine. They're just like an interview. The only difference is that you have to prep your participants a little bit more around not jumping in as much. Because when you've got, even with 3 of us here, we tend to, you end up stepping on each other just a little bit more than when there's just 2 people. So as soon as you have 5 people in a room, let's say, you kind of have to have a moderator that fully controls it and says specifically, Allan, right, answer this question for me. But Matthew, you answer this question for me. You directing exactly who's responding and when. And you have to have kind of signals when somebody really, really wants to jump in, whether it's just raising your hand on the camera or like a comment in the chat. So yeah, it just takes a bit more prep, but it's still definitely very doable.
And what about the actual tech for it? I mean, I'm sat here with my USB Samsung Q2U microphone plugged into my laptop. Simple, I don't have any more than that. I don't have,
Yeah.
Is it now much easier to do?
Yeah, it's just like this, like just getting on a call recording platform. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I mean, if you can do it from anything as simple as like a free Zoom room or a Google Meet room, right up to all of the different call recording platforms. Like you've got, Squadcast, Riverside, we've got Ala2, we've got all the rest of them that you can do call recording in. So yeah, you can just use one of them, no worries.
Yeah, I mean, the only caveat is that unless you were thinking, Allan, about in-person stuff. Is that what you were?
Not really. That's very difficult to organise, isn't it?
Yeah. I was thinking that. Yeah, so like Colin says, platform like this or the multitude of others will be totally fine. Yeah.
Yeah. I think looking sort of wider out with the promotion stuff, it sounds like you've got a great domain name there. You've got a great podcast name that really does what it says in the tin. So like your podcast name is searchable as well. So you're already doing a lot of the right things in terms of being found in the podcast directories. Somebody's going to type in, small investing and you're likely to pop up. Or maybe they're going to type in that how to process company reports and suddenly your episode titles actually start start to pop up. So if you just keep thinking that way, like your episode titles should all be answering questions. And I think, yeah, Matthew, you've got a couple of things to jump into around the content stuff later, don't you? Which was one of your questions, I think, Allan. But if you've got that handled, really, that's the search side. I think that's the inbound. The way I often see it is you've got your inbound side, your organic search. So as long as you're visible in the directories and on the web, that's one great method. And then if you can start to budget it in, you want to try and find one other outbound method. So one other way you're kind of pushing content towards users and using more of the algorithmic type approach. So letting new people find you through the algorithms. And that generally means social media of some sort, whether it's YouTube counts as that approach, but equally you've got like LinkedIn, you talked about Blue Sky, all those kind of things. Like, is that something you could budget for just now, or that's certainly something you could leave till later? What do you think your status is on that just now?
It's very so. I've always been rubbish on social media. On text-based social media, definitely. I've always just found it difficult and not very interesting. So I've never been big into. I was never big into Twitter or anything like that. I'm on Mastodon because one of the other things I'm interested in is like software development stuff, and a lot of Swift developers are on Mastodon. They all moved there. So, but I very much watch rather than engage. My son says, "Oh, you should do TikTok videos," which ironically might be easier because at least then you're just kind of, a short chatty thing that you do. But I'm not sure where to start that I would keep going with. Because I'm pretty sure that if I tried to engage more on Blue Sky or Facebook or X or anything like that, it just wouldn't last.
Yeah. So I totally agree. Matthew's nodding as well. It's the two of us are not kind of great on those sides as well. Like, yeah, it has to be something that you're interested in. It has to be someone that kind of floats your boat. And I wonder then the short side. So it's either, for me, it's often either the tech side. Like, so LinkedIn's working really well just now. Even Blue Sky and Threads a little bit. But the other side is the video, is the shorts. So that could, and I was going to bring this up because I think, again, your segments-based approach is great for this. So you've got, how long do your solo episodes tend to be?
15 to 20 minutes. The longest I've done is 19 minutes and the shortest is about 14, I think. That's what I aim for.
Yeah, great stuff. So your segments are probably in the sort of 3 to 5 minute mark or so, I presume. Is that right?
About that. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a couple of ways you could go about this that might be a really nice way to get this out there. Because they're segments, you've got these really tight little bits of content. So it's your book of the week. Let's say you've got your book and you've got your one takeaway from that book that you're going to share. You do that for 3 to 5 minutes on the podcast itself, but you take one 60-second, 90-second, even 2-minute segment, and that becomes one of your promos for that episode. Right now, YouTube Shorts are working really nicely for this, for us particularly, and for lots of other people. But it translates into TikTok, it translates into Instagram. It's worth thinking carefully about this because it's definitely a fair bit of extra work. Like, it's definitely a bit of extra time to budget into it. But I'm finding the approach that works quite well for me just now is after Matthew and I get off a recording for Podcraft, I don't do the searching through the episode to find a clip. I actually just take the thing that I talked about on the show and I open up my phone and I just record a 60-second clip dedicated just for that. Right. And I say, make sure to listen to the full episode at the end, you know, and then you have a link to the full episode as well. And I can tend to record a 60-second clip like that based on the notes I had for the main episode, actually pretty easily. And because I've just talked through it as well, you kind of processed it in your head. You can kind of create that 60-second clip, I find, quite easily just because you've already done the prep, you've already talked it through, and then you can kind of be quite concise and you can make sure you're putting a little hook, a little tease in there and mention the full episode as well. So that could be one thing to think about at least.
And do you do that just like talking to camera, essentially?
Yes. Exactly. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. You can do it the other way though. You can either do it talking to camera, so you could do it that way if you want, but equally you can also do just audio only and actually just do even a still image or there's a lot of AI tools out there now that can take an audio clip and actually put some video to it. And I can, like one I'm using, for example, is Filmora. So Filmora is a video editing tool, ostensibly, but it can take an audio clip and create an automatic kind of slideshow that gives a bit of visual to it. So you can do both.
It's probably easier to. So I'm not really up for editing video.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's the time-consuming part for sure. Yeah.
Editing video is not something I want to do. But equally, in some ways, that makes talking to camera a little bit easier, doesn't it? I suppose, because then it's just you.
Yeah. These things actually work quite well, really raw, actually. Even just like some of the top video channels these days are super raw material. Like it's just somebody in the car with their phone pointing towards them, driving along, not even looking at the camera, that kind of thing. So even just, pulling out your phone and just showing anything, even the view rather than your face. Or, some people are not comfortable going on camera. But if there's any kind of visual, then that can work quite nicely. So either of those can be a really nice little experiment to play around with. Not to take away from your full podcasting time, because it is kind of a play around and it is definitely extra work, but you can do it in kind of lo-fi quick ways like that, I think.
I could certainly have a go, couldn't I? Just, after doing the next podcast, just do a couple of quick shots and show them to to my teenagers. See what
indeed, take a couple of your segments. See if you can talk one of them into putting a couple of effects on it, or a bit of text, or the subtitles, or whatever. But even the raw one is perfect too. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Do you want to jump over to? I want to make sure we get to your content one as well, Matthew. You'd put a bunch of tips in here around the question around content sustainability. Do you want to jump over to that?
Yeah, I noticed, Alan, on your when you filled out the form, one of the things you'd said was convincing yourself that there's enough material out there to keep a podcast like yours going. So why is this on your mind? Like, do you struggle to come up with topics? What's the kind of lay of the land there?
I think actually, so the current format, doing the essentially the 3 sections, I started that pretty much for the last kind of 4 episodes, I think. Before then, I was focusing. I think I'm just kind of worried that it's so easy to think, oh, it's all been said, and if you're not careful, you're just going to have to keep repeating yourself. There's only so many magazines you can talk about, or so many. I think the format I've got is probably better. But in terms of finding content, it does just feel like there's that constant worry of, is there going to be anything this week?
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a couple of ways to look at it. Like, obviously, your format at the moment relies to an extent on finding resources, but and that's a great format, but you don't have to be completely married to it. So if there are other things that come up, topical stuff that you'd like to talk about, maybe just a recent experience, something you tried that worked or didn't or whatever, then you could kind of bring that in too. But I mean, how far in advance do you think about an episode's topic? Is it just kind of, the next episode's on your mind and, no further than that sort of thing?
Pretty much. That's because I got the idea and thought, right, I'll start now. So I didn't do all of the things that I know you advise people to do, is plan in advance and have some idea what you're going to do. But I felt like if I did that, I would never have started. So I did dive in a little bit. So essentially, my kind of process is that I look for things through the week, and then on Friday afternoon or Saturday I record it, and then post it so that it comes out Monday morning. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I don't think Monday morning is the best time for it to arrive, actually, but I felt like Friday or Saturday was the best time for me to do it while I was getting into it.
Why do you not think a Monday suits it very well?
I would have thought... I would have thought it was better on Monday. A lot of podcasts come out on Monday, a lot of the kind of newsy kind of ones, and I think it maybe gets a little bit crowded out. It's certainly in my feed. It does.
Yeah.
So
how evergreen are your topics? Because again, your topic is very alien to me, so you'll have to excuse me here. But like, if I was to listen to episodes 1 or 2, like, would there be stuff there that was out of date as such?
Some topics are more evergreen than others. Is it a podcast? I don't think it's a podcast you would go back and listen to the entire back catalogue. But if you heard an episode and liked it, you might go back and look at the titles. And if there was something that stood out, you would go and have a look. So, for example, the reading annual reports, that's not going anywhere. That's as useful as it's ever going to be, kind of thing. Whereas some of the stuff related to things that are kind of happening at the moment is less evergreen. It's in the middle, I would say. Some is, some isn't.
Anything you want to jump in with, Colin, here?
I was curious, you're talking about the idea of... I think one thing to think about is if you do kind of make your segment structure a little bit more flexible in that you've got your 2 or 3 resources of the week rather than having to have the blog, the article, the podcast every single time, it'll probably free you up a little bit to always have stuff to talk about. But equally, it sounds like this is something you do on a regular basis. Like, are you open to sharing? You're obviously sharing some of your techniques and thinking and all that kind of stuff. Are you open to sharing an actual update on your investment portfolio? Like, is there something that you could share that would help people see or track you over time, or that kind of thing, that would be something that does change every single week, whether you do anything on it or not?
Ooh. I'm not sure. I hadn't thought of that.
It's obviously a bit sensitive potentially, but equally, the more sensitive something like that is, as in sharing, like, here's an investment I made, here's where it's gone, this is how much is in it now. That's the kind of thing, obviously, is very of interest to anyone else out there.
So what I have found myself doing a little bit is in the more recent episodes, if the reason I'm interested in a resource is because I own a particular stock or I'm looking at a particular stock, then I'll say so. For example, I talked about the fact that I talked about B&M and JD Sports because they're relevant to me at the minute. So I don't mind sharing a little bit.
Yeah.
I think I'm not sure I'm organized enough to kind of share something, if you see what I mean, to produce something like to
have a report of your portfolio every single week.
Yes. It's not that I'm particularly precious about it. I do it, and I'm kind of average in the sense of I do okay, but make lots of mistakes, which I'm happy to talk about. But.
Well, I mean, I think that's enough. I think that is definitely so thinking about your content sustainability, that's never going to end because you're interested. This is a hobby of yours. This is more than that, probably. It's a real passion of yours. So you're doing this every single week. So you're always going to have those things to talk about. And then your resources of the week on top of that are actually just a really great little, extra. Or big extras, really, because that's the stuff that helps you learn. You talk about the things that you're learning. But those stories around, I was looking at JD Sports this week because this was in the news and that was in the news. And here's what I think is going to happen. Not investment advice, by the way. Like those kind of things. I think thinking of it that way actually might help with your sustainability. That kind of thing's not going to stop, is it? Unless you actually go off the topic altogether, in which case the podcast is dead anyway. So, I mean, that might be one way to help. Yes, for sure.
Yes, I suppose the more I've thought about it, the more I think that because I'm not an expert or a professional, the personal, how you're doing and stuff is very relevant, I suppose.
Yeah. I would agree. Absolutely. Yeah. And even just the personal, how you're thinking about it, like literally just here's a couple I didn't make any investments this week, but here's a couple of things I was thinking about. I wonder if you out there are thinking a similar kind of thing. Like that stuff is really gold. That's exactly what you want to be hearing when you're really into a subject as much as you are. So yeah, I think that's great. Matthew, do you want to go into... Matthew's got a content validation system that he put together as a kind of potential think through on this as well. Matthew, do you want to go through that?
Yeah, this is kind of something I've been dabbling away with, potentially to turn into some sort of resource. But yeah, it's just something that any podcaster could use when they're thinking about an episode topic. So I'll get to that in a wee while too. I want to mention the Whisper Titles framework and how we might generate some ideas from that. But when kind of thinking about putting an episode out there or recording an episode or even mentioning a resource, there are a couple of wee things that you could go through here. So personal impact, did this genuinely help me or teach me something new? We kind of talked about this already, but the past self-test, would I have wanted to discover this 6 months ago when I knew less? Clear value, can I explain why it's useful in 2 to 3 sentences without rambling? If you figure that out, tell me how to do it. Story connection, any brief personal experiences with this resource, you do that really well at the moment anyway. The beginner lens, will this help an investing newbie take the next step or will it overwhelm them? So it's about, if you're answering yes to 3 or 4 of these, then you could have a good deal of confidence in sharing it. And I put down here as well that your job isn't to be the smartest person here, it's to be the most helpful curator for people and similar journeys, maybe just a wee bit behind yourself. So again, this is a half-baked idea at the moment, but I'm looking to kind of turn this into a framework. So hopefully that's of some use.
I think that's really, really helpful, actually, because I think when I'm thinking about content, one of the worries is that it almost becomes a chore, rather than I'm looking at some stuff for investing and hey folks, this is really good to share. It becomes I've got to find something to put in the podcast this week,
Yeah.
And if you have a framework like that, then it does remind you of why you're doing it, doesn't it? Remind you of what the content's actually for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, looking beyond the pure creation of resources, even if you did an exercise like this, even if you ended up not recording any episodes from it, I still think it would be useful. So I think no matter what you're podcasting about, it's a good idea to have some topics, some evergreen topics just in the bank. You just have a list somewhere of, if I'm really struggling, I could look at this list and maybe I even don't record one of these, but it gives me an idea for something else that's kind of relevant.
Yeah.
So, Allan, you're obviously a huge Podcraft fan. You heard the Whisper Titles framework before. You listen to every episode, every minute of every episode. So,
multiple times.
Yeah, exactly. Our Whisper Titles framework, we've got what or why, how-tos, insiders, secrets, problem solution. We've got all these different frameworks for episode titles. So just reframing that into your own topic. Like if you went through this and you just think for each category, there's 13 of them, how would I apply this to my own topic? What would be a really good episode topic for me that fit with this type of episode title? And if you just had that list, like I say, even if you didn't make any of these episodes, I think by the end of it, the creative juices would really be flowing, and you'd have some great ideas to kind of riff from. So I would recommend setting aside even just 20 minutes with a coffee one day and just working through that.
Yeah.
I often find even just the first one, the W, the what or the why, like that's often the first one I sit down with people if we're coaching somebody through. And this is, you're obviously further on than this, Allan, but like when people are actually planning out their podcast, it's great to spend half an hour just taking a few of these letters, a few of these prompts from the Whisper Titles framework and coming up with maybe 10 to 15 episode titles for each one. And that kind of justifies, the longevity of this podcast. If you can come up with, 20, 30 titles, then suddenly that means, I've got 30 episodes, just in the bank.
Yeah.
But the first one, the W, the what or the why, so much can come out of that. Like if you have, what questions, like what questions, starting with what did you ask when you were first getting into this? And what do you still ask? And the same with why as well. well. And a wee resource there as well. It's kind of an oldie but a goodie is the Answer the Public website. So if you type in Answer the Public in Google, it'll pop up. And if you just type in investing, it'll actually break down all of the questions for that topic into these words. So you've got what, why, you've got how, you've got when, so it brings up all the questions that people tend to search on the web in your area. And there's always so much inspiration in there too. But I definitely recommend doing it yourself first for like 10, 20 minutes, because that tends to surface the stuff that's most relevant to you and your audience, and then go and expand it out potentially with a tool like Answer the Public as well. Have you come across that before?
I haven't, no.
Oh, cool. Yeah, no. Go and search it up. It's an inspiration for many, many, many episode titles over the years. Perfect. Okay. Anything else you want to ask, Alan? We've dug into a bunch of stuff there. We could go on for it. We could do a whole lot, really. I mean, there's so many other things we could dig into, but we've only got limited time.
Limited time.
But was there anything like in the last 5 minutes or so you wanted to dig into that we haven't done enough of yet?
So I know you're big fans of people doing seasons and so on, and maybe taking a break. I've kind of picked a podcast where it's just a weekly keep going, and haven't envisaged kind of taking a break, partly because if I take a break I probably won't start again, kind of thing. But so if you don't take a break, is it a good idea to try and record some, as you say, some like evergreen kind of podcasts that you can then just put out, say when you're on holiday, when you want a couple of weeks off or whatever?
I've got thoughts there. What do you think, Matthew? What do you do for that?
I'm not that organised, so I just tend, if I go on holiday, we have to wait for a couple of weeks. Tough, but I don't know. What's your thoughts, Colin?
I think so. I think in a similar way. I think consistency is one of the, if not the most important thing in podcasting success. So getting something out on a regular basis. But that doesn't need to mean every single last week. I tend to think of it as just don't miss more than one in a row.
Yeah.
So if you're recording week in, week out, but you have to take a week off, then actually 1 week out of, 1 month or 1 week out of 2 months is not going to kill you. It doesn't make too much difference that. If you can record something in advance, absolutely. Like if you have something where you can just, especially when it's nice solo shortish episodes like yourself, Alan, like if you can just record 2 or 3 ideas, put them in the bank and have them there ready for when you need to take a holiday or when it's just a crazy busy week, then that's a great idea. But equally, if, once every couple of months you do decide, I need to actually take a break this week, that's definitely not going to be a huge issue, as long as it's not 2 in a row. As long as you say to yourself, I missed last week, I can't miss this week, and get back into it. I think that's probably the more realistic, real life world of consistency, as opposed to saying, oh no, I've missed 1 week and that's it, I'm never going to start again, because what's the point?
Yeah.
But I think that works well. Yeah. Sorry, go on, Matthew.
I was just going to say, I do like, as much as I'm laughing about just leaving my listeners hanging, like I do like that idea of having a couple of evergreen topics in the bank. I think that's a good idea. Again, tying back in with the collaboration stuff, if you're constantly soliciting voice feedback from your peers, from your collaborators, you might build a bank of stuff that you could put episodes together and schedule them in their evergreen. And I lean on that with my podcast. Like every 4th episode is a question of the month, where it takes me, I just stitch all these clips together and do like a 1 minute intro, 1 minute outro. It always seems to fall when I go away for a couple of days. So it's really convenient. So relying on other folks to help you build that content as well is a good approach.
Yeah, it's a really nice way to fill it, actually, is those collaborative episode share as well. So if you start to build up those relationships with a few other podcasters or content creators, fill in a gap with somebody else's episode, take one of those contacts and say, give me one of your favorite episodes. I'll pop it on my feed this week. And don't even ask for anything back. It's just giving a bit away. It'll get something back in future, I'm sure. That can be a really nice way to fill that gap. And also, I know you're only, what did you say, in your sort of first 10 or so episodes, but replaying an old episode actually is really nice sometimes as well. So once you're a few months in, at least once you're 20, 30 episodes in, going back and picking something that's relatively evergreen from that first 10, there'll be definitely some people listening that haven't heard it. And even people that have heard it, actually, often you get something new every time you hear the same old episode and listen to it again. You get something new from it the second time round. So don't be afraid of doing that too, to fill any gaps if you really need to.
Right.
Of course, one of the big ways you're going to grow your show, Allan, is by being on Podcraft. We're going to send tens of thousands of listeners your way. So please let them know where they can find your show and start listening today.
They can find me. I'm Small Investor Toolbox. And the website is smallinvestortoolbox.com, but you can find me on any podcasting platforms. I think I ticked all the boxes, so I should appear on everything.
Good. You'll be
stuff.
big investor Toolbox after today.
Thanks
Millions.
very much for having me on.
No, it's been great. Thanks for coming on, Allan. It's it's great to talk it through. Always good to talk about new podcasts, and hopefully it gave you a few tips. And hopefully, if you're out there listening as well, you got a few tips through listening to how Allan's thinking about his podcast and how we kind of walked through how it might grow in future. All right, thank you again. We'll talk to you next time.